In today's video, I'm going to be talking about two areas of ministry that spiritually abusive people tend to gravitate to. In fact, with some of them, it seems almost like an obsession. So if you want to hear what those two are, listen for the rest of the video. So my name is Dr. Felicia. I'm a licensed psychologist and owner of Skill Set Counseling, where I focus on treatment of and recovery from issues related to spiritual abuse, as well as how to defend yourself against spiritual abuse. So, what are these two areas that spiritually abusive people really love to gravitate toward? I'm going to start with the first one. The first one is leadership. Spiritually abusive people really, from my experience, tend to be almost kind of obsessed with leadership, and they talk about it a lot. If there's any sort of like ministry or anything related to leadership, they are always on it, and they're always talking about how to become a better leader, how to develop leaders, all this stuff about leadership, leadership, leadership. They talk about it quite a lot, and they seem almost obsessed with it. And so, I'm sure you're probably wondering, well, why is that? First of all, I want to know from you guys if you noticed that. I have noticed that a lot of these spiritually abusive leaders really are honed in on this leadership thing, and it's not just leaders; it's spiritually abusive people. And the reason is that I think is leadership has to do with um being in some sort of authority over other people, right? Now, leadership is going to look different ways in different settings. But anytime somebody is given a position of leadership, what do they get? They get recognition typically. They're typically, separated from other people, and they're designated as being this person who is supposed to be kind of in charge. And with people who are spiritually abusive, um, this is like, the jackpot for them, because spiritually abusive people love to control other people. And when you look within the structure of like modern churches, there's a lot that, that focuses on leadership, right? Whether it's it could be explicitly in terms of, okay, we're going to have this leadership training for people, or it could just be leading some kind of ministry. There are all these different committees and groups and all these other things that need leaders. And so spiritually abusive people tend to gravitate toward these things. They really like leadership. They like talking about leadership. They really like these things a lot because it's kind of like the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the religious or spiritual way of bossing people around, right? Because remember, when people are in these spiritually abusive environments, they're never going to come out and announce their intentions. They're not going to be like, hey, I'm here to control people and, intimidate them and manipulate them. They're not going to say that. They're there so they can do this in a covert way. So it's really important. And the interesting thing about that is, when we look in the Bible, right, when Jesus himself talked about leadership, he was very clear that people who lead under the kingdom of heaven, under Jesus's kingdom, like they don't lead the way other people do. There's a particular passage in which he says that you've seen people, he uses this phrase, lord it over other people, but he's like, that's not how it's going to be with us. We lead through service, right? And so, he talked about how he was, on earth to save people, but also to serve them. And then, later on, he washed the disciples' feet. And so I want you to contrast that with a spiritually abusive leader, and did they talk? I mean, they might have talked about service all the time, but did you actually see them doing that, right? And and of course there are going to be some things that people are going to do behind the scenes. That's not what I'm talking about, but usually you can tell from the way people talk and from the way that they act, what is important to them. And with a lot of these spiritually abusive individuals, they don't look at themselves as serving others. They're going to tell everyone else to serve, and they might, give you all like a guilt trip or lecture about how you need to be dedicating even more of your precious free time to serving their goals and their visions, right? So they'll tell everyone else to serve, but they won't do it, right? And this is not only within the spiritually abusive like setting, right? So these individuals and their personal and private lives are often the same way. So they can, talk up a storm about leading other people, right? But then even in their own like environments, whether it's home environments or micro environments, they are not doing what they are talking about, right? They're either horrible leaders that people are either afraid of or don't like or respect, or they're not even doing the things that really demonstrate leadership, and that is in part through service, right? They don't have they're not really interested in doing that service stuff because that's beneath them. Now they'll do that in front of other people so that they look good, but behind closed doors it's not like that, right? And so that's really important that you understand that, and understand that leadership is a lot more than just having a position or being distinct from other people, right? And in my opinion, I think that that when you go into these spiritual environments, I think true, genuine, really good leaders are few and far between. I think a lot of people think they are leaders, or they're just kind of put in that position because they want to do it and no one else wants to do it. But just because they're in a leadership position doesn't make them a good or effective leader. And I've also found that the ones that talk about it the most are not the ones that are very good at it. I found that the people that are really good leaders, in my opinion, are the ones that don't talk about it a lot. They're very humble, and they get things done, and they value other people. So that's just my 2 cents on, leadership. But so basically, leadership is a cover for these individuals to boss people around. Okay. So the second area that I really want you to pay attention to that spiritually abusive people are pretty obsessed with is prophecy. And I have a video on spiritually abusive prophecy that I'd like for you to watch if you haven't watched it already. But the area of prophecy is really important. I've seen so much spiritual abuse happen under the guise of prophecy, right? And really it is, think about how arrogant somebody is to believe that they are the God in your life, right? And this is how a lot of these spiritually abusive prophetic people act. Instead of encouraging you to develop your own relationship with God and hear for him for yourself, they are like, no, I'm going to be that person in your life. And you don't know anything, and I know everything. Now, of course, they're not going to say it, but that's what their actions are like. And so a lot of these people are very, anytime there's like a prophetic thing, they're in it, right? They are forcing their way in, and, speaking or not, they're not speaking on behalf of God, but they are claiming to do that. And so you really want to be careful. I would say that if you are in any kind of prophetic ministry, that make sure that what is going on there is safe and not spiritually abusive, because it can be very difficult to determine that. So I've talked about humiliation rituals. They're used a lot in these environments. Basically, this person, people spiritually abusive, like people like these ministries, because they get to tell people what to do, but they get to hide behind God and said, well, God said you should do this, or God is speaking through me. And so it could be anything as ridiculous as saying that you have to get married to them, get married to this other person, not do this job that you're going to do, give them this amount of money, or it could be, they could also be using the cover of prophecy to be very passive aggressive and petty, right? And so maybe they might have an issue with you, or they don't like you, they're jealous of you, threatened by you, whatever the issue is. And so instead of, working out their own emotions, I'm going to do a little sidebar here and say that spiritually abusive people tend to be very emotionally immature. And so instead of dealing with challenging emotions that we all face from time to time, instead of dealing with those and being very honest with themselves that, yeah, I'm having a problem with this, I need to fix this or address it, they will, insert themselves into this prophetic thing and then now go around and tell people what to do or launch their petty grievances under the guise of prophecy, right? And so I can do a whole video series on this, and let me know if you're interested in that. But a lot of people have been very, harmed deeply by this type of prophetic nonsense, because it's, number one, it's not prophetic. It is that person claiming to speak on behalf of God to get their agenda done, right? And so, people have really messed with people's lives, telling people you should marry this person, you shouldn't go to this school, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And they also do this. Sometimes they're not necessarily manipulating people's lives, but they are doing it to have the spotlight on them, because in these types of environments, people who claim to be prophetic, they have a lot of clout. They have a lot of attention on them. And so it is a way for them to gain recognition. Spiritually abusive people tend to be emotionally immature. They also tend to have some narcissistic traits, right? I'm not saying they're narcissists. I'm not diagnosing anybody, but that narcissistic need to constantly have supply. And what I mean by supply is affirmation, validation. Yes, we all like affirmation and validation, but for people who are narcissistic, it is a bottomless pit. They will never get enough, and they are obsessed with getting it, and they will extract it at all costs. And so for people who are in these spiritually abusive environments, when they are going into, this prophecy thing, and they're like, oh, I'm a prophet, or, I'm doing this, they're doing it to gain attention and to control other people. I think about spiritually abusive people that I have come in contact with and that I've observed in action. And those people tend to gravitate to either one or both of these areas within ministry, leadership, and prophecy. And again, why are those two things so important? Because they're ways of getting attention for themselves, and also ways to control other people. And so I want you to be very careful of that. If you are in a spiritual environment and you are involved in any sort of leadership, anything, or prophetic anything, make sure that you have your guard up at all times, and I'm sure that there are healthy ways of doing this. I'm sure that there are, healthy prophetic ministries that are out there, but they have to really be very careful about making it not about a particular person, and making sure that personal grievances and vendettas aren't being played out within that kind of thing. I mean, anybody can say God told them to say something, and they could not like somebody and say, well, you shouldn't be doing this, this, and that, or, you're in sin because of this or whatever. And so be very careful with that. So I hope this information has helped you. I'd like to hear from you all in the comment section as well. Do you feel like there are any other areas where these people, spiritually abusive individuals tend to gravitate toward? And why do you think they do that? And if you have been in these situations where either leadership or prophecy has been a vehicle for these people to, wreak havoc in other people's lives, how did you deal with it? What happened? I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Go to my website, Skillset Counseling, to book a free consultation. And I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. Bye-bye.